Hello, my friends. If you're new here, I'm Red Spirit Mask. I teach about black people's art, history, and culture, and recently it came to my attention that Donald Trump is attacking black art, history, and culture. And frankly, I don't think it's getting enough attention in the media, so that's why I'll be sharing this info with you today. Alrighty, I'm going to read part of this news article for you. Critics see Trump attacks on the Black Smithsonian as an effort to sanitize racism in U.S. history. President Donald Trump's order accusing the Smithsonian Institution of not reflecting American history notes correctly that the country's founding fathers declared that all men are created equal, but it does not mention that the founders enshrined slavery into the U.S. Constitution and declared enslaved persons as 3/5 of a person for the purpose of the census. Civil rights advocates, historians, and black political leaders sharply rebuked Trump on Friday for this order, entitled Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History. They argue that his executive order targeting the Smithsonian Institution is his administration's latest move to downplay how race, racism, and black Americans themselves have shaped the nation's story. It seems like we're headed in a direction where there's even an attempt to deny that the institution of slavery even existed, or that the Jim Crow laws and segregation and racial violence against black communities, black families, black individuals even occurred, said historian Clarissa Merrick Harris, a professor at Morehouse College, the historically black campus in Atlanta. The Thursday executive order cites the National Museum of African American History and Culture by name and argues that the Smithsonian as a whole is engaging in a concerted and widespread effort to rewrite our nation's history. And if you're not aware, this is kind of a classic right-wing tactic where they accuse their enemies of doing exactly what they're doing, because obviously Trump's the one who's trying to rewrite history. Anyway, the article goes on to say, instead of celebrating an unparalleled legacy of advancing liberty, individual rights, and human happiness, the order argues that a corrosive, divisive, race-centered ideology has reconstructed the nation as inherently racist, sexist, oppressive, or otherwise irredeemably flawed. It empowers Vice President J.D. Vance to review all properties, programs, and presentations to prohibit programs that degrade shared American values or divide Americans based on race. Trump also ordered Interior Secretary Doug Bergen, whatever the fuck, to determine if any monuments since January 2020 have been removed or changed to perpetuate a false reconstruction of American history or inappropriately minimize the value of certain historical events or figures. Trump long criticized the removal of Confederate monuments, because no shit, of course he would. He's basically a Confederate himself. And if you don't remember, the movement to remove these Confederate monuments to racist, traitorous assholes gained steam around the time of May 2020, which is, of course, when George Floyd was murdered. Critics argue that this latest Trump order is meant to quash the recognition of black Americans' contributions to the nation and to gloss over the legal, political, social, and economic obstacles that they have faced. According to a race historian by the name of Ibram X. Kendi, Trump's approach is a literal attack on black America itself. The Black Smithsonian, as it is affectionately called, is indeed one of the heartbeats of black America, and also one of the heartbeats of the nation at large. Congressional Black Caucus Chair Yvette Clarke suggested that Trump wants to distort the national narrative to racist ends. We do not run from or erase our history simply because we don't like it, she said in a statement. We embrace the history of our country, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Alright, we can stop there. The next part of the article points out Trump's hypocrisy and later concludes by rightly pointing out that many museums and educational centers across the country will not be able to keep their doors open without some amount of government funding. Ibram X. Kendi gets the final quote of the article, in which he states, "To me, that's part of the plan. To starve these institutions that are already starving of resources so that the only institutions that are telling America's history are actually only telling political propaganda." Now, obviously, I can't read J.D. Vance's mind, so I don't know what he wants to remove from the Smithsonian Museum specifically, but here are some examples of material at the museum that he and Trump may try to hide from you. We all know Trump hates the Black Lives Matter movement, so does that mean that he may defund the Smithsonian for showing you something as simple as this photo by Jermaine Gibbs that shows a lady holding a Black Lives Matter sign? Or does the material need to be more specific, like this photo from Devin Allen that shows a boy holding a sign that says "End Police Terror," which of course points out the systematic issue of police unfairly targeting black people. And if that's something they'll defund the museum for, then likely this photo by Sheila Pre Bright would also draw the anger of the Trump administration with signs that not only say Black Lives Matter, but also Black Trans Lives Matter, as well as decriminalize poverty and homelessness. And last but not least, a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King saying capitalism has outlived its usefulness. Even if it's just photos like this that Trump forces the museum to hide from the public view, that alone would be a travesty. But we don't know how far this will go. Is, for example, this artwork too woke for J.D. Vance? This painting is titled Revolutionary by Wadsworth Adkins Durrell, and it depicts Angela Davis, an important civil rights activist. And hey, she's a scary communist, and we know that Trump has been scaremongering about communists, so is this artwork from 1972 too woke? Is it too on the chopping block? Let's read about this painting. The caption starts with a quote from Angela Davis herself. "I have given my life to the struggle. My life belongs to the struggle. If I have to lose my life in the struggle, well, then that's the way it will have to be." The caption goes on to explain the following. Revolutionary is a tribute to political and social activist Angela Davis. The portrait is formed through a complex and dynamic arrangement of color and words. The words were taken from speeches given by Davis from the Soledad Brothers Defense Committee and an interview published in the September 11th, 1970 issue of Life magazine. The image was inspired by Dan O'Neill's photograph, also featured in the magazine. The letter B, repeated throughout the composition, simultaneously represents the word bad and the phrase "Black is beautiful." Let's go back even farther in time. What about this artwork? This painting is called The Hunted Slaves by Richard Ansell, made in 1862. It exemplifies the kinds of brutal punishment white people enacted on enslaved black people. It depicts an enslaved man and woman who are running away from their master, and because of that, they are being attacked by the master's hunting dogs. The man, who has yet to even have time to fully remove his handcuffs, is trying desperately to defend him and his partner from the vicious attack dogs. Again, I don't know how far this White House order will go, and when it comes to Trump, you never even know if he will go through with the word vomit that comes out of his mouth. But we have to be prepared for the worst. So having said all that, hopefully you can see why I'm concerned about this. Surprisingly, I haven't yet heard of any of these racist attacks extending to the National Museum of the American Indian nor the National Museum of African Art, which, to be clear, is separate from the National Museum of African American History and Culture. But I think we should be on guard for that scenario because Trump is targeting another Smithsonian museum, that being the American Women's History Museum. According to a report from the BBC, Trump's order alleges that the American Women's History Museum, which is in development, plans to recognize men as women. In other words, Trump wants to prevent this museum from acknowledging the existence of transgender people. Now, although I've talked about politics before on the channel, I've never actually talked about transgender people. So to be clear, I think trans people have the right to exist and enjoy life like any other human being. And since I know that trans people have been a point of contention lately in the news, let's talk about them for a minute. The rich and powerful are always looking for ways to divide the poor and make them hate each other because when the poor are divided and fighting against each other, they're too distracted to unite against the rich elites that manipulate society. Back in the old days, the rich tricked the poor into fighting against each other by telling them to hate Jews, Native Americans, and black people. The rich would convince the poor that these are subhuman monsters that should be treated like animals. At some point, the rich white people got so granular in their their divisions that they even said the Irish and the Italians are not white people and are lesser humans because of it. Even being part of the Catholic faith made you a lesser human in the eyes of the rich elites of America. In more recent times, the rich made new boogeyman for the public to hate, such as Muslims, Latinos, and gays. Transgender people are thus simply the latest folks in a long line of other people groups to be framed by the rich as the new boogeyman. And the right have gained some success in demonizing them, probably because transgenderism is a harder concept to wrap one's mind around, and most people likely never had a trans person in their life, and it's easier to believe lies about a person you don't know. Having said all that, I should note that transgenderism is not a new concept. I know it can kind of seem like that with the way the media talks about it, but they've been around in some form or another throughout history. I may not be super knowledgeable about trans history, but I can, for example, point out that in both ancient Greek theater and in various African masquerades, from the Ballet in the West African country of Côte d'Ivoire to the Punu of Central Africa in Gabon, and all the way to East Africa among the Makonde of Mozambique, there are instances where men took on the form of a woman. Yes, these examples are a temporary transition to the feminine, but they still are historical examples of humanity showing gender fluidity. Also, something I learned recently is that our modern era isn't the first time a government has been actively hostile to trans people. According to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, in Germany there was an anti-gay sex law known as Paragraph 175, and apparently not everyone arrested under Paragraph 175 identified as a man. During the German Empire and the Weimar Republic, Germany was home to a developing community of people who identified as transvestites. Magnus Hirschfeld coined the term transvestite in 1910. Initially, this term encompassed people who performed in drag, people who cross-dressed for pleasure, as well as those who today might identify as trans or transgender. Today, in English, the term transvestite is outdated and offensive. However, it was widely used at the time. Some self-identified transvestites were arrested under Paragraph 175. These were people who were assigned male sex at birth, but identified and often dressed and lived as women. When they engaged in sexual relations with men, the Nazi regime saw this as male-on-male sex. But many transvestites did not see themselves as homosexual. They did not consider their sexual relations with men as male-on-male sex. Nonetheless, they were punished according to the regime's definition. Now, I don't bring that up to say that someone who is anti-trans is a Nazi. My reason to bring that up is that I hope learning that fact will help steer listeners away from hateful ideology. I'm certainly no expert on trans folks, but I can tell you this. Whatever your life problems are, more than likely trans people are not to blame. More than likely the reason you can't afford a home, or afford health care, or whatever it is, you can blame on rich people. And by extension, the capitalist system that lets these rich elites control society. And since I don't talk about politics too often, if you want to learn more about the possible solutions to capitalism, then I recommend checking out these two YouTube channels. Democracy at Work, which is hosted by a Harvard economist by the name of Richard Wolff, and Andrewism. I don't know if Andrew has any particular degrees like Richard Wolff has, but pretty good channel. Check it out. And if you want a more entertaining way of entering the progressive space, try reading V for Vendetta. Yes, that's right, read a comic book. Anyway, as you can see, two museums are currently being targeted by the Trump administration, both the National Museum of African American History and Culture and the American Women's History Museum. Other museums may get targeted as well. Museums are an important educational source, and we should not allow Trump and his goons to mess around with how history is presented. Many of the educational videos that I and other content creators produce for you to watch rely on sources like museums for info. We can't let racism, transphobia, and bigotry dictate what is acceptable to learn about. I suppose it would be appropriate to end this video with a quote by someone like Malcom X or James Baldwin or Fannie Lou Hamer or some other civil rights leader. But since I'm a nerd, we're going to end this video with one of the wokest quotes in film history. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.